Thank you, everybody, for being here today. You know that over the weekend we had a bipartisan delegation. Actually, it's more tripartisan because we did have an independent with us as well. But what we did, we demonstrated the U.S.'s unwavering support for the freedom-loving people of Ukraine, and we affirmed strength of NATO. So we departed this last week with the conviction that America, Ukraine, and the free world we have the will and we have the means to unite and stand up to Vladimir Putin. So while we were in Poland, we heard directly from Ukrainian civil society leaders, this group of passionate, strong women delivered a clear message to the United States. And that message was, we need more lethal aid, and we need it as soon as possible. They are very rightly concerned about the pace and the flow of the lethal aid into Ukraine. We also met with non-governmental organizations, and we met with Ukrainian refugees, including one woman who left her husband behind to fight against the Russians. She ultimately wants peace and to be able to return home to her community and her home. The message from all of the Ukrainians we engaged with was that Ukraine will fight to the very last man. They can and they will win this war. Beyond Ukraine's borders, the trip clarified NATO's posture against Putin's unjust and bloody war of aggression. We are united, and it was abundantly clear that if Putin chooses to wage war against a NATO ally, he will rue the day. There will be swift payback. After discussions with U.S. commanders on the ground in Germany and in Poland, I'm confident that the American military is primed at the tip of the spear to deter further aggression and keep Americans safe if we are called upon. So going forward, America's commitment to Ukraine and to our NATO allies must always endure. America cannot be pushed around, and we cannot hold back, especially at this critical time. The U.S. should help facilitate the transfer of the Polish MiG fighter jets and follow on by quickly backfilling with our own F-16s. We must continue the flow of lethal aid, but it must be at a faster pace. Part of the solution is drawing down on the pre-positioned military equipment that we already have staged in that command theater. And finally, is the consensus of America and our NATO allies that Putin must be held accountable for his war crimes. Everything that he has committed, he must be held accountable for. But it will be after Ukraine wins this war. We have seen bombed schools, we've seen bombed hospitals, and we have seen innocent men, women, and children killed. Authoritarianism cannot, and it simply will not, prevail. Defending freedom in Ukraine is defending freedom everywhere. This is a critical time for all of us, not just the Ukrainian people that we encountered and visited, but certainly for all of Europe, all of our NATO allies, and it certainly means the freedom right here in our homeland as well. I will be followed by Senator Gillibrand.
I want to start by thanking Senator Ernst for organizing this trip. This was a delegation of 10 bipartisan senators from every major committee, from Armed Services, from Intelligence, from Homeland Security, from Appropriations, and it showed. We together went to get the most important insights into the situation in Ukraine and the opportunity to engage with our counterparts in Europe. We had the chance to meet with members of the Bundestag and the Deputy Foreign Minister of Germany, and I look forward to working with them in the future to continue to build our relationships. Additionally, we were able to spend time with military units, training to increase our overall readiness to defend NATO territory. I was able to meet troops who were trained at Fort Drum, as well as from every corner of New York State. I think it's incredibly important that we remember the sacrifices of our military members and diplomats that are being made every single day as we continue to respond to this crisis. And it's important that we remember that the role of the military in this moment is to assure and deter, to assure our allies that we are committed to the region and to deter Russian actions that widen the conflict. I was pleased to learn that after our trip, Germany announced a deal that would decrease their reliance on Russian gas imports, helping to further starve Putin's war machine. And I look forward to their continued support and increased security investments. We're seeing a strong unification in opposition to Putin's unjustified, unprovoked, and unwarranted war on Ukraine, and in support of our democratic values and universal human rights. The most important takeaway that I had from this trip was the deep level of desperation and urgency from the Ukrainian people, what they are feeling and what they are facing. We met with 4 compelling female advocates, heads of NGOs and local governments in Ukraine. They asked for 4 things to help them win this war against Russia. First, increasing the sanctions, including sanctions against more individuals around Putin, helping him to wage this barbaric aggression. We have to work with our allies to ensure that those sanctions are enforced in as many nations as possible. Second, as Senator Ernst mentioned, increasing military weapons and increasing the lethality of what we provide them, including Stingers and Javelins. Declare that Putin and his generals are war criminals for their actions. They are. They have bombed schools, hospitals, and innocent people. Last, talk about what we will do, not what we will not do. And I think that is the right approach, and we stand together to talk about what we will do from the U.S. Senate. I want to do everything these women have asked us to do. I think they are right. During our trip, we also had the chance to visit with representatives from some of the incredible NGOs that are working in Poland, like the World Central Kitchen, to help these refugees and their families. These are parents of young children, elderly who could not fight. They've only known democracy, and they've never imagined having to leave their homes. And as Senator Ernst said, they will return. The U.S. must do everything it can to provide aid and shelter to these refugees who have been forced to flee their home, and to isolate Russia from the international community and ensure they face the costs commensurate with their actions. When President Biden visits Poland, he'll hear from our allies and see what I saw, and I feel he will be equally moved to support these refugees. Hopefully, he will also meet with these women that we had the opportunity to meet with and hear directly from them their urgent requests. Oh, sorry. Okay, your paper.
Okay, and Senator Collins.
Thank you. Well, first, Senator Ernst, let me thank you for organizing and leading this extremely important CODEL. To me, the most memorable conversation of this trip was one that I had with a young mother with 2 children, one age 8, one age 6, at the Polish Welcome Center, just 3 miles from the Ukrainian border. She said this to me: I want to live in peace. I want to be back in Ukraine, but I have to keep my children safe. So this young mother with her 2 children was leaving the only country she has ever known, leaving her husband behind, not knowing whether she would ever see him again, in order to keep her children safe. The only way that we can end this humanitarian crisis is to provide the Ukrainians with the lethal aid and the humanitarian support that they need to end this unprovoked, unjustified war, this war of aggression that Putin is waging on a free, sovereign, and democratic country. I, too, was impressed with the surge of American troops in countries that are members of NATO, like Poland. Their response has been extraordinary, but it is not enough. We cannot allow Putin to continue to bomb shelters, hospitals, homes, humanitarian corridors. We have to provide the Ukrainians with the means to prevent this bombardment. And that means not only giving them the MiGs that the administration has held up, it means providing them with additional anti-aircraft defenses. And every moment, every hour, every day counts. We do not have time for endless debate and delay. For if we delay, thousands more innocent Ukrainians will die. Finally, I believe that the administration should look at means to allow Ukrainians who have family members in this country to join them and give them temporary protective status. Just this morning, I heard from someone from the state of Maine who offered to take 3 Ukrainian families in for the next year. So we need that kind of reform as well. Again, this was an extraordinary trip, and it has only redoubled my belief that we have to do all that we can in terms of providing weapons and humanitarian assistance to the brave people of Ukraine. And Senator Moran.
Susan, thank you. Joni, thank you for today and for leading us in this effort. And Senator Gillibrand, thank you for your leadership in making this a solidly bipartisan educational trip and a delivering of a message to the Ukrainians, to the Russians, to Putin, and to our allies and NATO countries. What I saw in this visit was an inspirational citizen of Ukraine. I saw tremendous leadership from President Zelensky, and I saw a country that is willing to die and sacrifice for that freedom and liberty. It's a reminder to us that the stakes here are huge. If freedom and liberty doesn't mean something in Ukraine, where will we decide that it means, where it's valued? The goal in my return is certainly to provide the Ukrainian people with the tools that they need to succeed. What I want to make certain that we do is that we're not just providing enough to survive, enough humanitarian aid, enough lethal aid to just survive. I want us to provide the necessary tools along with our allies to the Ukrainian people and to President Zelensky, not just to survive, but to win. It is immoral for us to do less, for us to just allow these battles to continue day after day with the death of Ukrainians. So I hope that President Biden, perhaps before he leaves for Ukraine, I hope that our Secretary of State and our Defense Secretary would meet with this group of senators. Let us explain to them what we saw and let us get the facts. Because there's certainly a belief that despite the tremendous efforts that the United States of America has made to provide that relief, those assets militarily and humanitarianly, there's a belief by Ukrainians that we are way too slow in providing, that it's seen by them in too many instances as being promises, but not promises kept. America loses its credibility. We lose our ability to make certain that Putin understands the tremendous price that he is paying and will pay. And so delivery, not just passage of legislation, but delivery in the hands of Ukrainians, the tools they need to succeed, to win, is paramount. And I hope that this administration will allow us the chance in a bipartisan way, in a very respectful way, to make certain that what we saw and what we learned and what we heard from Ukrainians and our NATO allies, that we can deliver that message. Because the reality is there's not a moment to lose. We are late now. We were late yesterday. And in the absence of quick movement, a slow march of bureaucratic policies and efforts does not save lives. It costs lives. And we need to make certain that our colleagues in the Senate, our colleagues in Congress, and the administration, the Biden administration, understands not a moment to lose. Lose a moment, lose a life. Thank you.
Vladimir Putin has already lost this war because if his goal was to somehow absorb Ukraine into Russia, that will never happen. Even if he grinds some of these cities into rubble, even if he continues to bomb, even if he continues to attack civilians, he will never be able to persuade the Ukrainian people that they in any way want to be part of Russia. I almost said the Soviet Union. That's really what he has in his head. He's lost. The people of Ukraine will want no part of Russia for generations. We heard that over and over. I think one of his other goals has been for some years to divide NATO. He's lost that too. We have never seen NATO as united as it is right now in the last 30 years. And we saw the evidence of that on the ground in Germany and Poland and right up to the Ukrainian border. And I agree with my colleagues that time is of the essence. And one of the things that I'm coming back with is wanting to determine just how long does it take from the time the Congress votes the money, as we did 10 days ago, to when it crosses the border into Ukraine, both for humanitarian aid and for lethal aid. We need to know exactly how that works and how fast it occurs, because we don't have weeks and months. We have hours and days. And that is, I think, one of the things that we're all committed to working with the administration, the Department of Defense, on how this process actually works. The second thing that I came back with was enormous admiration for all the people that are working together to help the people of Ukraine in this situation. The logistical challenge of this is astonishing. Think for a minute of thousands of people coming across the border into what amounts to a big shopping mall, which all the stores were closed. Sanitation, bedding, food, transportation. These people are fanning out throughout Europe and to the United States. It's an unbelievable logistical challenge. In terms of the humanitarian aid, why is that so important? It's so important because already about 3 million people have left Ukraine. So we have 3 million refugees. But one of the things we learned on this trip is there's 6.5 million refugees within the country that have been displaced from their homes within Ukraine. So almost 10 million people, 1/4 of the entire Ukrainian population, are now refugees, either within the country or people crossing the border. We saw trucks lined up to take humanitarian aid into the country. I suspect we also perhaps saw lethal aid, but we didn't know it, that's what we were seeing. But that's the crucial element that we have. The other final thing is America should be very proud of the people that we have working for them over there. The sergeants, the majors, the privates, the military people, the State Department people, all those individuals that work for this country, and people from private life. As was mentioned, we had a meeting with about 100 NGOs from across the world, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the United States, all contributing to solving this humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, while the people of Ukraine use the means that we're providing in order to defend themselves. We are, to quote Franklin D. Roosevelt, the arsenal of democracy, literally. And we have to continue to do so. And for the first time over the weekend, for me anyway, we heard people talking about winning. It wasn't, let's hold the Russians off for a time. Let's defeat Vladimir Putin. As I say, I think he's lost in any case. Whatever he wins, he will never be able to hold because of the resistance of the Ukrainian people. So it was an important and eye-opening trip for all of us. For those of you that wonder, we left here right after the vote on Thursday night, flew all night. We're in Germany all day Friday, then in Poland all day Saturday, back in Germany yesterday meeting with our troops. So it was an intense weekend. As John Cornyn said on the plane last night, isn't it great that we don't have to go to work tomorrow? Oh, wait a minute, we do. And Senator Cornyn was one of our members of the trip. He's in the Judiciary Committee, as you know. But this was an extraordinary experience. But the thing that I think we all took back was the determination of the people of Ukraine to defend democracy and defend their country.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to Joni, Senator Ernst, for pulling us all together. You're going to hear a lot of repeating themes, but it's not like we've coordinated our message here. It's just when you move and you travel and you see this firsthand, you realize the urgency of now. You realize that this is occurring in Europe's, not backyard, in their front yard. And you understand that the challenges of the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian military, the Polish people, my goodness, I think all of us have such admiration for what the Poles are doing. They've opened up humanitarian segments. They are the front line, large border with Ukraine. And they're a member of NATO. And they have taken the lead in terms of working with our soldiers, with the NATO soldiers, the NATO military, to do and be ready. Because we can't kid ourselves. Senator King is right. Putin has already lost. But if of any stretch of the imagination he would have some success, would he stop there? Would this be the end of where his empire building would go? And those nations in the front yard, in the NATO nations, they know the answer to that is no. And that strengthens the resolve, and I think has been a large part of why you've seen not just the strengthening, but the speaking with one voice that you see with NATO, the United States, and other friendly nations. Putin is waging an immoral and unjust war. We did talk to folks in the refugee centers. They're serving 6,000 meals a day, volunteers. We met folks that just fly in to be able to help. A young man who was a native Ukrainian who said, I couldn't stay in my home, my comfortable home in Washington, D.C. any longer. I had to be there. I had to be there to help. We saw Katerina. She has 2 children. She said, I couldn't let my children listen to these endless sirens anymore. She lived 2 miles from the Russian border. She left her home, her husband. She's going to the United Kingdom, but she doesn't want to go. She wants to live in freedom and her home and live on her property and have a normal life. And I don't think that's too much to ask. The Ukrainian people are defending their freedom with our help. They are doing a magnificent job. They were underestimated. The Russian troops were overestimated. And what's happened? It boils down to the resolve of the Ukrainian country, of every man and woman in that country who are going to fight to the end. NATO is strong. We spent some time, as they said, in Germany talking with the foreign minister, but also with our ambassador in Germany. Germany has stepped up to the plate like we haven't seen. Full commitment to NATO. Another 100 million euros. Billion with a B. Sorry, thank you, Angus. 100 billion euros. We spoke with the Bundestag, which is their equivalent, Congress, from all the parties. They've got one mixed-up system there, I'll have to say that. But thank goodness we only have to keep track of 3. But everybody was at the table, and it seemed as though there is a united front here to make this commitment. And I think that is quite a statement from our German friends. I think that also there's nothing like seeing this, and this what brings the urgency of now that you hear in each one of our voices. We are committed to what we've done in the past, but let's face it. We put that vote off for a week on Ukrainian aid. A week. That's a lifetime in this conflict. Every day, every minute counts. So that was really reinforced to me as we moved on. There are other sanctions, as Senator Gillibrand said, that we could move forward on. So I want to say to the Ukrainian people and those who are brave enough to come and speak with us, and the NATO partners that we saw, and our military is absolutely awesome. When you see the leaders, the young men and women who, the 82nd Airborne, I asked one of them, how much notice did you get to be deployed? 24 hours, packed up, out the door, and proud to be doing it. It just gives me chills to think about it. So I think that we need to realize, and the American people need to realize, this is much bigger and much more urgent, and has much bigger ramifications. So we need to support, we need to arm, we need to keep our humanitarian assistance, and I think we have a great momentum here off of this trip with our other colleagues as well when they visit and when they hear our voices. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelley. Every so often, there are disruptive moments in history that provide moral clarity to the situation and what's going on in the world. In the United States, one would argue that was probably 9/11 here. We heard from our German friends and from other Europeans that February 24th was Germany's 9/11, was Europe's 9/11. By the way, it was no coincidence that Vladimir Putin waited until post-Beijing Olympics, which ended on February 20th. I got to believe that he sent a save-the-date card to Putin from China to make sure that they had clear air for this invasion. When we were in Germany, we had dinner with the U.S. ambassador to Germany and had a great meeting with the Bundestag, as my colleagues have pointed out. We returned back to the hotel. It was a quiet night in Berlin, and we were just a few blocks away from the Brandenburg Gate. The first president I got a vote for when I was a freshman at Montana State University was Ronald Reagan. And I went back to the Brandenburg Gate that night. I had one of the military escorts walk with me. It was quiet. It was a beautiful evening. And it was at that place on the west side of Berlin, in West Berlin, where Ronald Reagan uttered those famous words, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." That wall is gone. In fact, you can see in Berlin where it used to be. But the people of Berlin are free. But they became free because of the strength we had as a nation and as a world, the resolve to stand up against totalitarianism. Ronald Reagan talked a lot about peace through strength. That message of peace through strength rings true today. I might add something else we talked with some members of the Bundestag and other conversations is peace through energy security. I kind of wonder if President Reagan were here today as he was thinking about energy dependencies, about how important it is, who supplies your oil, your natural gas, your coal. If President Reagan were here today, I wonder if he would walk down, perhaps in front of the Capitol, perhaps in front of the White House, and say, "President Biden, drill, baby, drill." Today, Vladimir Putin is weaponizing energy. Just this past September, I had a group of Ukrainian leaders. It was September 30th that came to Capitol Hill. They met in my office. There were some leaders from Odessa. We had a member of the Ukrainian parliament. A former member of the parliament was also there. About half of them could speak English. The other half couldn't, so we did this through a translator. And their number one request was, you've got to shut down the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. That was the number one request. And as they were walking out of my office on September 30th, they handed me a mace. It has a handle about this long. The ball was about this big with great big spikes on it. And it had the Ukrainian colors, the beautiful colors of Ukraine, the yellow and the blue, little silk tassels on the bottom of it. And I thought, well, that's quite a gift to get from the Ukrainian delegation. And they said, "Senator, each one of us has one of these maces on our desks back in Ukraine as a daily reminder of what it is to live under tyranny and authoritarianism." What's happening is a wake-up call for the world. What's happening is a wake-up call on energy. Germany, the United States, the EU, we must reverse an anti-energy course. I think that's a very important part of the dynamic here. And it's not about being opposed to certain types of energy like renewable energy, but let's think of renewable energy as being additive to our portfolio, not a substitution. Germany's gotten in trouble. Other European nations have as well because of this dream of getting rid of fossil fuels. And hopefully there's moral clarity now in the importance of having a diversified, balanced energy portfolio. Now, we said something about a negotiated outcome. There's talk about negotiations. We have conversations with staff, with the military, with many over in Europe on this trip. As much as we would like to see a negotiated outcome, I believe a negotiated outcome is unlikely. If you heard President Zelensky speak to the Knesset yesterday, to the Israelis, he quoted the former Prime Minister Golda Meir, who, by the way, was the Prime Minister during the Yom Kippur War of 1973. She was born in Kyiv. She's Ukrainian. He quoted her, and she said this: "We intend to remain alive. Our neighbors want to see us dead. This is not a question that leaves much room for compromise." That was President Zelensky yesterday speaking to the Knesset. And while humanitarian aid is badly needed, and my colleagues highlighted the importance, and it was heartbreaking to see what we saw, the results of evil. A grandmother sitting on a chair with 2 crutches on the side. She couldn't walk very well. Her belongings probably in 3 bags. I wonder what her story is. And right next to her were 3 little ones. Probably the oldest, I would say, is 5 or 6, a brother, and then 2 younger sisters with their little stuffed animals. I mean, they could have been our grandkids. You think what they're going through at the moment. So the humanitarian aid is essential, it's needed, and thank God for these NGOs and for the various government agencies who are responding to this great need. As Angus King said, 3 million refugees, probably 10 million total in terms of displaced. But the bottom line is this: the fastest way to end the suffering is to win the war. And that is why we heard that loud and clear from the Ukrainians. We need the lethal aid now. They said, we don't need more statements, more press conferences. We need action. We need the aircraft. We need the lethal aid now. They said there's a window to get it. That's where it's going to be most beneficial, and it's now. So I'm grateful for Senator Ernst and this bipartisan delegation that was able to travel together and stand unified in our support for the people of Ukraine.
Well, I want to thank Senator Ernst for putting this CODEL together. I want to thank all of my colleagues for joining. And what we shared on this trip, it was moving, it was emotional, and it is urgent. The need is urgent, and I'm grateful that we were able to go this weekend and all of us passing on these messages, because this bipartisan visit is proof that the United States stands united in our support of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Like my colleague said, in Poland, we visited a refugee center where displaced Ukrainians were seeking shelter and refuge from Vladimir Putin's brutality. A shopping center set up with cots and food and everything you could imagine, mostly filled with women, children, because the men were at home fighting. These women and children, they fled their homes. They left everything behind, the lives they had built. And I have to say that the heroism of the Ukrainians is truly inspiring. And like my colleagues have also said, throughout the trip, we had the privilege of meeting our United States forces. First, to thank them for their incredible service and their bravery and their courage. Then to receive briefings from commanders on the situation on the ground in Ukraine and their readiness as part of NATO. And again, to see how that security assistance and training that NATO is providing to the Ukrainians. Our military's mission is to assure and deter, and I am proud of our servicemen and women. All of us had the honor of meeting servicemen and women from our states, and I had the honor of meeting and personally thanking Nevadans who are there thousands and thousands of miles from the battle-born state. They're not only the best of Nevada, they're the best of all of our states, and they are the best in our country. And I know I can speak for my colleagues when I say what I saw on the ground in Poland and Germany made me proud of our actions to hold Ukraine and Putin accountable, but we must do more, and we must do it now. We've rallied our international allies to help defend democracy. We've provided those billions of dollars in security and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. It needs to move swiftly. And we are continuing to put a chokehold on Russia's economy through the toughest sanctions in history. And as my colleagues have said, we must continue to do more to help Ukrainian people defend their sovereign nation and defend democracy. Nothing could be more important. And so the trip underscored for me the actions we can and we should be taking to be sure the Ukrainian people have every bit of support they need: humanitarian aid, military aid, the training and the resources that they need to defeat Vladimir Putin, to defeat Russia's brutal and inhumane invasion of a sovereign and democratic country. We can accept nothing less.
Well, this weekend, we witnessed the worst of mankind, and we saw the best in humankind. The best would be the Polish people, the love and the compassion that they've showed to their neighbors. Over half the Poles have invited one of their neighbors from Ukraine into their own homes. In their refugee center, and I think Senator Collins called it right, a welcome center. And I think that's exactly the right description. I've done medical mission work throughout the world, and I've never seen a more efficient, gracious, respectful delivery of aid to refugees, whether it was their health care, their food, their shelter. But more than that, it was the next step. It's amazing that the Polish people have processed almost 1 million people in 2 weeks' time. Not only are they taking care of their needs right there at the center, they're helping buy and arrange transportation to another destination, to a loved one, whether it's in the United States or the UK or somewhere else in Europe. So they've went above and beyond in so many ways. The worst of mankind, and that's the criminal war of Vladimir Putin. My colleagues have described some of the conversations we've had with refugees. And to paint the picture again, typically a young mom with 2 or 3 children who's left their husband behind to fight a war. And they will fight to the death. They are committed to their freedoms. And I think the story that we're not hearing enough about is that this war didn't start February 24th for the people of Ukraine. It started decades ago when they were fighting for their freedom, that this is a freedom-loving people. They've tasted what freedom is after being under suppression from the USSR for decades, and they don't want to let that go. The minute we landed in Germany, we could feel a buzz of the importance of the transatlantic relationship. I can tell you it was palpable, and it wasn't just from their legislators. It was everybody we saw speaking about the importance of this transatlantic relationship and how important it is for Germany to step up. Germany does $275 billion of imports from Russia. They can put a mighty hurt on Russia if they choose to. And lastly, I would talk about our military once again, whether it was meeting soldiers from Kansas or from the Big Red One, the 1st Infantry Division out of Fort Riley, Kansas. Those soldiers have been there for years, training with people from Poland and other allied nations. Even you're training the Ukrainians as well, and I think that's one of the reasons the Ukrainians are putting up such a fierce battle right now. And I'll agree with Senator Moran. I think that the Ukrainians can win this war. I do see a path to victory, but the world has to step up. We're only doing a fraction of what we could be doing. I call on a war tribunal to be held and to hold Vladimir Putin accountable as well as his generals. I call for the world to seize his assets and use his personal assets to build back Ukraine. I call for all people of the world to stop doing business with Russia today. We need actions, not words. We need all businesses across the entire world to stop investing and paying for this horrible war. We need the United States to implement their sanctions yesterday, not June 24th. We are doing a fraction of what we could be doing. All nations from across the world need to inflict maximum economic damage on Vladimir Putin. And finally, my colleagues again have talked about the need for military aid yesterday. We don't need to debate it. We don't need to talk about the pros and the cons. Get them the damn weapons. These people will use them. They will fight to the death, but they have to be empowered to do that. You know, much is given, much is required. This country has been given so much. We are still the leader of the free world. We need to start acting like it. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, we'll go ahead and take questions. I'll remind everybody, 10 senators on a delegation trip. It is that important, bipartisan, and speaking with one voice. Yes, yes.
Senator Ernst, I believe it was Senator Gillibrand earlier who said that we should be talking about what we can do for Ukraine, not what we cannot be doing. The Pentagon right now is standing in the way of the U.S. being the facilitator for the MiG-29 aircraft going from Poland to Ukraine to help them with their air defenses. I'm wondering if you agree with the Biden administration's rationale here, which is that it would be too provocative of a move toward Russia.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't discount what the administration is saying. The list of weaponry that they asked for was very specific, and they were focused on javelins and anti-aircraft missiles. The MiGs were not on that list. So there is a rationale. I understand the rationale. I also understand the perspective of my colleagues who just want to give them whatever they've ever asked for, which is a legitimate and understandable position. I think there is a lot we can be sending them immediately without having to make that ultimate decision on those particular aircraft. I also know that the way they are going to win this war is not through the air, it is through the ground, and they need the ground defenses.
And I would just remind everyone, too, I did lead a letter on this issue, the transfer of the MiGs. I am very supportive of that. And President Zelensky, as well as others from the Ukrainian administration, has asked for that. Secretary Blinken had given a green light to that transfer very early on, and we hope that he will uphold that commitment. Yes, Chad.
Thank you. We heard everyone talking about trying to get this aid into Ukraine here. But how do you do that without inflaming the situation with Putin, saying, oh, NATO is too involved, that this is an act of war? What is the role of the United States and NATO to actually get this aid? I mean, do you just drop it off at the border? I mean, there has to be some sort of movement into Ukraine, and how is that not perceived by Vladimir Putin or others as the United States and NATO vis-a-vis getting more involved in a war?
Yes, and anything that we do, I mean, President Biden could sneeze and President Putin would probably say that's escalatory. We cannot continue to live in fear. President Putin is going to threat that any move that, whether it's the United States or any other NATO country makes, any of that could be considered escalatory. But fact of the matter is, he is the one that is escalatory. He is the one that has invaded a free and sovereign country. So the Ukrainians have every opportunity to fight back, and we need to enable that. Therefore, what's being done by NATO, the United States, other allied partners and friends, they are providing certain levels of lethal aid to the Ukrainian people. It is being staged throughout Europe, and from there, the Ukrainians are picking up those supplies and delivering them into Ukraine. Won't go into any specifics other than that, other than Ukrainians are the ones that are going in and moving equipment into Ukraine and positioning it according to what their military is calling for.
There's nothing here in terms of NATO or international law that would be perceived. And again, I know what you all have said about Putin and people sneezing and everything else being escalatory, but that's not something that is not interpreted as an act of war.
No, we are not fighting Russians directly. We are providing the Ukrainians the means to defend themselves, and to that they are doing an admirable job.
Can I say something?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
It's no surprise here. We've picked a side. We're on the side of freedom and the Ukrainian people. And Vladimir Putin has known that from the very beginning. So for him to say that we're escalating or that anything that we do is an escalatory, he knew that NATO and the free nations, freedom-loving nations of this world are and have been on the side of Ukrainians. We've been training Ukrainian soldiers through NATO for years. We've watched as he's been killing people in Ukraine over the last several years. So I think he cannot possibly think that the world buys the fact that we are standing tall with the Ukrainians as anything more than what he knew it was going to be before he went in there. And the other thing I'll say is we're being very careful with our NATO partners to make sure that lines are not crossed. We know how to do that, they know how to do it, and the Ukrainians need to do it. But we're on their side.
Senator, I heard like a lot of unity on urgency of getting the weapons. You did just pass a $13.6 billion package, but only about half of that was weaponry. Do you have a sense coming back that that package is too small and there needs to be more? And also, there's a potential this week for the Senate to act on permanent normal trade relations, potentially other sanctions. Do you think that there's a chance of actually getting that done this week? And is that the message that you're going to have to your other senators to not delay passing some of these things and sending them to the president's desk?
The message absolutely is that we cannot delay. Every day that goes by, we see additional cities being bombed, additional Ukrainian deaths. So what we need to do, and as we talked about on our way back from the Codel, and it was incredible, when we came back together, got on the plane, we were making lists of every item that we needed to execute and do it right away. So whether it's visiting with Army Materials Command and find out exactly what is being transferred, because we do need to know and understand that. With the dollars that were passed by Congress, what are we funding? You know, what are those items? Where are they located? How quickly can we get them to the Ukrainians? So all of that we need to understand. And then as we move forward, yes, additional lethal aid, additional humanitarian supplies. I think all of that will be incredibly important. The cost of freedom for Ukraine is very important. If we see Ukraine fall, we will likely see other countries fall, and it does put the United States in jeopardy. So we want to deliver as quickly as possible, and we want to understand exactly what we are providing to the Ukrainians. Is it what they are asking for, or is it just some random supplies that were left over somewhere? No, we have to make sure that what we're sending them will actually provide for a victory. Yes, ma'am.
This is for the Republicans who went on the trip. There was a large group of Republicans who voted against the funding for Ukraine. How do you feel about that now, considering some members of your party voted against it, and you came back now?
That was in a very large package. So it was part of the omnibus bill, but by and large, almost every Republican I have spoken to believes that, yes, we should be providing lethal aid as well as humanitarian aid for the Ukrainian people. We do see it as a way not only to protect Europe, protect Ukraine, but also protect our own national security, because it is at risk, make no bones about it. We see Vladimir Putin, he will be emboldened if Ukraine falls, and he will continue from there. So I would not say that, no, they don't support Ukraine. I would say they opposed having such a large omnibus package. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the possibility of Ukraine falling. As the United States sends hundreds of billions of dollars in lethal weapons to Ukraine, are you concerned at all of the possibility that aid then ends up in the wrong hands and in Russian hands?
Well, I know that this is what maybe the administration is thinking of, and we actually had one of the Ukrainian women call us out on that because they pointed out, is this Afghanistan syndrome that you are suffering from? And what I would say is that the Ukrainians have told us that the burn rate is very high on the types of munitions that we are sending in. So we know that they are using what we are sending them. And this is a people that is willing to fight to the death. So I have full faith and confidence in the Ukrainian military as long as they have the means to defend themselves and push Russia out. But right now we seem to be doing just enough to provide for their defense, but we still see Russia gaining. Well, we need to give them what they're asking for, what their military planners have suggested we provide for them. And it's not just the United States. It will also be NATO partners that are providing these weapons as well. So am I worried about that? It might be in the back of my mind, but I know that if we are enabling the Ukrainians, they will put up the best fight ever, and they can push on to victory. We know that. This is very different than Afghanistan. Yes, sir.
Over the weekend, President Zelensky announced that he was suspending the activities of 11 different opposition parties in Ukraine. And most of them were kind of minor parties, but one of them was the Opposition Platform for Life. It has 44 seats in the parliament. All of them, ties to Russia. I'm just wondering what you all make of that generally. I mean, is this something that's concerning to you, or is it, we're in an emergency, it's a war, you kind of do what you have to do?
Well, and I don't want to speculate on this because it's just been announced, but I don't know what intelligence might surround that. So we certainly would want to know, are there Russian operatives that are working within their party structure? We're not certain. So I don't want to condemn him for it. Obviously, here in the United States, we have very robust discussions and encourage everybody to participate in government. So I hope that at some point we're able to see that restored. But I don't want to question because I don't know the intelligence behind his decision.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks everyone so much. Good job. Wonderful.
Good job,
Thanks
Joni. Thank you.
everybody. Great.
Good job.
Great.